to just maybe give you a bit of a background to why we're having this conversation. And just to say that, you know, we recently had this major system-wide interagency evaluation of how we were doing gender in the humanitarian system. And of course, it tells us, you know, we're doing some really good things, but there are still lots of gaps. There are issues around leadership. There are issues to do with accountability. There are issues to do with lack of leadership and participation by women. And of course, the funding and resource issue remains one of the critical gaps. We also have various papers by our gender reference group members, CARE, UN Women, UNFPA, the Women's Refugee Commission, have all released papers and analytical discussions around what are some of the gaps for women and girls empowerment, and what more do we need to do to make the humanitarian system more centered around women's rights and also more feminist informed. But also, what do we mean when we say feminist informed, and what do we mean when we say gender transformative agenda for humanitarian action? I know that often when we talk about gender equality, we tend to talk about it in the context of protection, in the context of GBV. And we want to make sure that we also complement those conversations with conversations around rights and empowerment and opportunities and decision making and participation, so that it's not only about the need to protect women from gender-based violence, but the need to really provide all of those spaces and opportunities as well. And so, you know, we know that these conversations around what does a feminist humanitarian system look like? What are some of these feminist principles that feminists are always talking about? And people are, feminists and feminist networks are having these conversations on the margin. And so we felt that as the Gender Reference Group, this global body that coordinates, we wanted to bring that conversation into some of these mainstream spaces and to really invite much more frank discussion amongst humanitarians around, you know, what is it that we're aiming to do with the humanitarian system when it comes to gender equality? Is it about women's rights? Is it about empowerment? And, you know, where does feminism fit into that, or does it at all? Lots of very provocative questions, which I'm sure we're all going to answer in the next 90 minutes. But I thought it was important, or we felt as a collective, it was important to have this conversation. And especially now, given that we've had the last 12 months of COVID, where we've had over 400 reports and research that tell us that women and girls are much more disproportionately impacted by the global pandemic than we had originally anticipated. So it's not imagined, it's real. It's not exaggerated, the evidence is in. And so we do need to think about, you know, what is it that we need to do more of, especially in the area of work that we have in humanitarian space, to ensure that women's rights and some of these feminist principles are informing our work, because this is around not only humanitarian action, but it's about sustainable development goals, achievements for women and girls beyond just the crisis that we're talking about. So I am very excited to be joined by a panel of speakers, feminist friends that I've worked with and have been inspired by over the past decade. If I can just perhaps introduce them briefly, and then we'll get into the conversation. So on this panel, we have Ms. Naomi Tulai Solanke, who is also the steering committee member of the Feminist Humanitarian Network and the founder and executive director of the Community Healthcare Initiative in Liberia. She has a lot to say on this matter, and we were having earlier conversations around how the Feminist Humanitarian Network is leading a lot of these feminist discussions and is really pushing for space for local women leaders. And I think it's great that we can be here to amplify some of their voices and perspectives. We're also joined by Dr. Madhumita Saka, who I call Madhu. She's the Interagency Senior GenCap Advisor, currently working for the Somalia operation. And she's been a long-term gender advisor with lots of insights, and we're looking forward to hearing from her. Then we also are joined by our global CCCM cluster coordinator, Wang Sophampanich. She is, coming from, what we would normally consider as a non-traditional gender protection entity. But we also wanted to show that, a lot of the conversations that we're having requires this collective action and responsibility. And it requires the non-gender, non-protection experts to really, dive deep and really critique the way that they work. So we're very excited to hear about some of the work that they're doing. And then we're joined by Ms. Geeta Anani, the founder and director of ABAD, which is one of our gender equality centers in Lebanon. And he's a key partner with many of us doing this work in the Middle East region. So with that, if I can now turn to this very provocative panel. The idea is that they give us, a 5 to 6 minute, thought-provoking speech, remarks, just to invite us to think. And then we're going to have an interactive panel discussion afterwards. So please do listen in and be prepared to, I guess, intervene afterwards. So if I can invite Naomi first to share your ideas and reflections around women's rights organizations, feminist networks, and and how we can better do this work in collaboration. Naomi. Naomi, are you with us?
I don't see her name.
Okay, so while we wait for Naomi, is she here? Okay, so while we try to connect with Naomi, let's start with Madhu. Madhumita, please take us away.
Thank you. Thank you, April, for this opportunity. I will be taking you through what I think does not work, what hasn't worked, and what could be done based on my experiences in different conflict situations. So we do recognize that women and girls are most affected by conflicts and also by natural disasters, which we have observed, whether it was in the tsunami or in Syria or currently in Somalia. We find that a significant proportion of whether it is IDPs or refugees are women and girls. Yeah. So now, even though, but the issue here is that we find that even though they are the most affected, they have the ability to contribute to humanitarian efforts. Yeah. They look at different ways to reduce sufferings. They often go beyond humanitarian responses. They are always ready to jump in and to make those little efforts to make life different for themselves, the family, and the community. We often find them engaged as facilitators in reconciliation efforts, as well as we also find them participating in peace processes. This has been from my experience in Liberia. In Liberia, it was the women, it was the women's group, it was the market women who made this difference, who were engaged throughout in the peace processes and were responsible for bringing in peace and the reconciliation efforts. I think Anu will be able to speak from her own experience in the reconciliation efforts that she was engaged in Liberia. So across all these crises, we find resilient women. But we always assume, as humanitarians, we assume that they are helpless victims. And as a result, we look at primarily protection and specifically GBV as an issue that needs to be addressed. And we need to target women and girls. And once we target women and girls, it is assumed that we are addressing gender issues and we are promoting gender equality. My entry into Somalia, the first thing I was told is that we are working on gender. We have a very strong GBV group, so it means I'm addressing gender issues. It is very, very important for humanitarians to go beyond looking at gender-based violence as the only issue when we are addressing, when we are looking at gender equality. Now, across all crises, we also find that we need to change, we need to look beyond protection, as April very clearly said in the opening statement, that we cannot just look at protection as the only issue. For all of us working in humanitarian crisis, a gender-responsive humanitarian action would mean we need to recognize the potential of women and girls. We need to look at them as powerful agents of change, and we need to support their agency, look at empowering approaches, and look at women in more leadership position, engaging with women-led organizations, women's rights organizations. I think that's the only way we could address the issue of why women are left out, why women and girls are left out, why are there, and also it's not just an issue of women and girls. We also need to look at other intersectional issues when we are looking at humanitarian response. Now, all humanitarian initiatives need to integrate into the design, implement. We do have some strong approaches when it comes to design, but when it comes to monitoring and evaluation, I think there is very little that is happening. Very little reporting on sex and age disaggregated data to really tell us, and including disability data, to really tell us what is happening when it comes to the response efforts. So we need to be informed by a gender-based analysis that uses a rights-based approach. That's the only way that a humanitarian response will be accessible. Now, my question always is that why women and girls are excluded from decision-making processes and their potential as change agents of change ignored? I would say that it is ignored. Now, the question is that very often we are saying engaging with women or appointing them in leadership position is very difficult. It's always assumed that there is the issue of culture, norms, practices, which is going to act as barriers and will prevent them from participation. Now, this is an issue when it comes to cultural norms, when it comes to decision-making processes. All these prevailed before the conflict. They will continue during the conflict and after the conflict. But what we need to understand is that, are we going to just assume that nothing can be done about it? Just because these cultural barriers are preventing them from women participating? No, we need to look at, are we offering them a safe space? Are we adopting an empowering strategy? Are we looking at our approach at more rights-based approach to engage with the women? So these are issues that need to be addressed when when we would want to look at changing the situation. Now, we also forget that crises are an opportunity to change the discriminatory social norms and power imbalances. So humanitarian actors need to look at this as an opportunity and need to contribute to changing unequal power relations. Now, if there are more and more women and girls as IDPs and refugees, and I'm sure we can, there could be strategies which could look at engaging with these women and girls. Secondly, we always find that women are volunteering for different advocacy campaigns. You have an advocacy campaign for political participation. You have an advocacy campaign on violence on these different celebrations, whether it is the Human Rights Day or it is the violence against women. We have hordes of women, we have number of women coming forward to participate. But when it comes to having women in committees, women in leadership positions and all the committees that we established in our IDP camps and in other locations, why is it we fail to get these women in those leadership positions? This is something we really need to see whether the problem is within us, is within our approach, or we are too laid back. We'd like to continue to work the way we have been working. I think that is we don't want to make this extra effort. So my key ask would be that we need to look at women not as victims, but as change agents, as participants, as leaders. We need to support their expertise. Women have expertise. They are not people who need to be told. They're not just victims. They have skills. They come with them with skills. They have knowledge. We need to look at them as knowledge bearers, as people with skills, as people with power, and we just need to give them this opportunity to deliver. So my key ask to humanitarian, the leadership would be promote them in leadership positions. And I would like to end with a little story. Just give me 2 minutes. A little story of Ferial. Ferial Kiwan was the first female camp service officer in Shatila camp, which was established by UNRWA in Lebanon. And amongst the 12 camp officers, she was the only female camp officer. And this is what she had to say. She said that women stay in the camps. They keep watch on everything that is happening inside the camps. They come to me with information. They can also give you information on who's doing what, who are the abusers, what kind of information is flowing through in the camps which are harmful for the others, what kind of misinformation is also doing their rounds in the camps. And she said that we need more women as leaders. Women come to me because I'm a woman and they trust me and they're able to speak to me. So with Ferial as an example, I would say it is possible. We need to promote women as leaders and we can do this. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Madhu, for those really provocative and also very inspiring comments. I saw that you lots of claps, which is great. I was laughing because I heard you at one point call out the humanitarians or the humanitarian system, humanitarians, as being lazy. And I thought, oh, this would be great on Twitter. Humanitarians are lazy for not doing proper feminist gender equality work. And so on that note, I want to invite Naomi, I think, who's just joined. Fantastic. I think your conversation on women's leadership very much segues from Madamita's. Please, Naomi, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. the internet technology was about to fail me, but I'm so happy. So I'm gonna be using my phone, laptop, just connect. But however, women work, we are more than protection. So so the conversation is kind of interesting. Over the past since 2016, since the World Humanitarian Summit, over and over, the women have been conditioned to just being put into a cluster that is called protection. And sometimes you wonder that with all of the agency that we have, with all that we come with, we are more than this box and framing that we have been conditioned and put into. So what are women asking for when we ask for gender equality, when we ask for gender equity within the humanitarian system? Is beyond childcare, it's beyond reproductive health, it's beyond sexual gender-based violence. When we ask for equality within the humanitarian system, we are asking for roles that are influential, leadership roles. We are asking that our decisions are considered, that our decisions are included, our decision as part of the humanitarian system. When we ask for gender equality of equality, when we ask for equality within the humanitarian system, we are seeing that we've been amplified. The previous speaker just said it right. Whenever there are protection issue and they're like, okay, we're going to call the women. We are more than that. Women are leaders. Besides being leaders, women are on the front line. When before disaster hits, women are in the front line. We are already responding. During disaster, we also respond. After disaster, we need to build back better. So we are supposed to be considered at the very high level of humanitarian system, and not just at the high level. We should be at all levels: rural women, community women, national women, women in the diaspora, women that are in development work need to be visible. The work that we do cannot be overemphasized just by putting us into cluster group. So what we are asking since the World Humanitarian Summit, what we are asking since the grand bargain, this is 2020, we actualizing the grand bargain. We still having conversation on women participation. For me, in some sort of way, is disheartening because the level of work that women has done to ensure that the lives are saved, not just women life. The amount of work that women have done to ensure that community well-being is paramount. The amount of work that women have ensured to ensure that we have peace and security is not being amplified. All we see every day is that we have been conditioned with our anatomy. Why you want to put more women into protection? Because there are more women reporting sexual violence too. We are supposed to be to protection, but there are other roles that we also play more than protection. So for every time I see that we have been conditioned back, there is this pushback that tell me that there is a loan system that we still need to dismantle. And within the feminist humanitarian network, that's what we are pushing. We are pushing that women role be amplified and not conditioned and not just put it into a box. We are pushing that the agency that we come with is not just an agency to say that we are the mothers in the house or the roles that we have been conditioned to. Our roles are more than what people have conditioned us to. And it's about time that we clean that space. It's about that those are the boys club within the humanitarian cycle recognize that we are just not protection cluster leaders. We are accountable. We are transparent. We deliver on time. We have all category all the right definition of what it takes to be a leader. It's about time that you recognize that. And if you want a humanitarian system that responds to all and leave no one behind, it's about time that we push the women agenda. It's about time that we see women in more leadership role. We see women over the finances. We see women over the a partnership agreement, because when women are over the partnership agreement, we're going to see more local organizations, women-led CSO, that are doing amazing work, having access to funding. It's about time that we see women leadership being amplified at all levels of the humanitarian system. So I think this conversation would have been any much better than now. The time is now. The time is now that we see women taking that front role, because it's not something that we are asking, it's something that we are entitled to, because we play that role every day in our life. So the Boys Club in the humanitarian system now need to recognize that the agency and leadership that women come with is more beyond protection, and it covers all of the sector. And we are asking that our equal representation is not just at one cluster, but our equal representation is at all levels, because we have it. We have what it takes to ensure that no one is left behind when disaster hits. We have what it takes to ensure that everyone's rights are protected during and after disaster. We have all it takes to ensure that the humanitarian system is a humanitarian system that caters to all, leave no one behind, and everyone's rights are protected and respected. So thank you.
Naomi, thank you so much. Very powerful comments from you. And I just want to add one, one further comment to what you're saying, is that, we want women at the table at all levels, as you say, but also beyond the women's issues, or beyond what is traditionally seen as women's issues. I think often humanitarians want women at the table when it's reproductive health, women's issues, child protection. But what you're saying is that, women should be at the decision-making table for all issues to do with their lives. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to invite the next speaker, Juan, if you want to come in.
Thank you, April. And thank you very much for the opportunity to join this panel. It's always refreshing to join a panel where I actually know almost no one listening in. So it's always good to move beyond our typical sector and kind of the same group of people that we work with. So as April said, I'm the Global Cluster Coordinator for Camp Coordination and Camp Management with IOM, and I'm based in Geneva. So I would like to take you through a little bit about what camp management and camp managers do, and what we've been working on towards mitigating and preventing GBV risks within our work. So the work of camp managers is to ensure participation and representation for all of camp residents. We coordinate the need, assistance, and flag gaps within the displacement locations. And we work with other stakeholders to make sure that living conditions are safe and dignified. And we also advocate and facilitate discussions around longer-term and durable solutions for the population within displacement sites. So this means that we're often in daily contact with people, displaced population, as well as host communities. And you may know some of the work that we do through something like, complaint feedback mechanism that exists in the camps. We set up and support camp committees or other types of committees within the camps. You might have seen our information desks and information campaigns if you walk into a displacement site. The collaboration between CCCM and GBV actors started 7 or 8 years ago. And it started because some of our camp managers in the field reached out for support around how to handle GBV disclosures, especially when we have no specialized actors working in the area. And this started discussion that then led on to the development of the pocket guide for non-specialized actors around GBV disclosures. This is the work we were working on with GBV AOR, as well as GBV guidance reference groups. The work that we've been doing over the past 5-6 years led towards development of other kind of guidance, working also with like wash and shelter sectors. We develop guidance around site planning that will mitigate and prevent GBV risks, as well as distribution and post-distribution monitoring, and how to make sure that those are done with proper consideration and measures that were put into place to minimize the risks. But what I would like to spend the next few minutes talking about is the work we're doing within camp coordination and camp management. And this is the Women's Participation Project. This is a project that we started in 2015 with the Women Refugee Commission, as well as with IOM and the Global Cluster. So some of the discussion that started this project was based on the fact that when people talk about women participation, it's almost a box ticking exercise. Like, how many women do you have on a camp committee? You know, what percentage of women were represented on the committees? What we wanted to get down to is, how do you achieve meaningful participation? It's not simply turning up. It's not simply getting a seat at the table, you know, but how do you actually be part of the decision-making process within the camps? And so we started to, and this is like the big work we were working with WRC, is to develop methodologies and an approach on how to, I guess, establish the, you know, and measure participation and meaningful participation, and what is required in order to increase that level of engagement and empowerment within camp governance structure. We rolled out the toolkit that
We've lost
did
you.
I mute myself?
Oh, yes, you're good now.
Okay, cool. So I was just saying that we developed the toolkit to look at women's participation in the camps and camp-like settings. And at the moment, this project is active in 6 countries, in Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, Mozambique, Bangladesh, and Ethiopia. And we're actually working this year to start the project up in DRC as well. So since 2015, we've worked with over 5,000 displaced women. So these are the women that actually directly engage with us on the project. So some of the learnings after 5 years of implementation, and I should probably give a shout out to PRM, who's been funding this project as part of the Safe from the Start initiatives that have allowed us to look at mainstreaming a lot of the GBV risk mitigation within our sector. So the 3 things I would like to highlight that as our learnings and findings over the past 5 years. The first is that it takes time. That participation and community engagement is a process, and it takes time, and it takes money, and it takes people. And I think many of you are aware, I mean, humanitarian sector, like turnover of people, can like set back a project, you know, like easily. And we think the reason that it takes time is because the trust building between the team and the community takes time. And I think equally important is the continuous engagement with you know, and often a male-dominated communities on why it's important to have women participation and engagement. And the other is, I think it also takes time to build communication and leadership skills for women so that they're able to confidently, I think, express their concerns and need in an environment, I think in a more public environment where they may not be used to. I have a quick example from the work we were doing in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, where we started a pilot project in 2018. And I think it took a while, and I think there's parallel work also to look at, you know, the main leadership structure, which was very male dominant at the start of the camps. You know, the setup of women's committee, at the same time, the different part of the work is trying to make sure that more women are elected into the kind of camp representation structure. But it was only until 2020 where, you know, we felt like, I think, stronger the impact of what we've been doing. I think is when the women's group approached the team on the ground and say, we would like to be part of this work around COVID. You know, the work that is going on to prevent COVID and to raise awareness amongst the camp population. So we work with the team to carry out trainings and work in 4 of the camps in Bangladesh. And in the end, they've trained over 85,000 people in awareness and prevention measures related to COVID. The second point that we thought was really important to point out is that women's group are not homogeneous. They're not all the same. And I think when we talk about it or when we engage, it becomes like one blob of we're engaging with women. And I think they often have different needs. I mean, those that are mothers with young children and those that are, you know, just passing through their adolescence years could have extremely different kind of needs, interests, and hope, I think, for their future. In the Women Participation Project, we often do consultations separately for women who are already part of the leader group and those who are not. And I think in more than one instances, we still find that even though there's a women's committee and representation structure, some of the women may still feel that they're not represented or consulted in the process. And we also found that we needed slightly different tools and approach to engage like adolescent girls, as well as women and girls with disabilities that may require different approach and engagement methodologies. And lastly, before I run out of time, I've already run out of time, April. And lastly, maybe more to point out the challenges that we have is how do we measure the impact of the work that we're doing? I think mainstreaming work or, you know, participation can sometimes be really hard to measure. And I think there's often pressure also to report on achievements. We find that like, you know, sometimes the numbers doesn't say everything about the process and about the stories that happen on the ground. You know, and we find that often, you know, people have indicators around participation as, you know, percentage of women in the training, in the committees. And I mean, I don't have a solution to offer on this one completely yet, because I think we're still struggling a little bit. What we're finding is that it's also really hard to measure things for short term, because I think the impact of participation, leadership, empowerment of women and girls, you know, takes years to manifest itself and to be demonstrated. And I think it's obviously having dedicated funding has been vital to not only to make sure that we can input the resource and the capacity required, but it also to follow up from year to year to continue engagement with different countries, with different actors. I think we have really good working relationship with the different GBV actors and GBV forum. And I think the collaboration has been broadly very, very productive and constructive. So I'm going to end there, April, and back to you. Sorry, I took a little bit longer than I was planning to. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Anne. So I'm going to take over the moderation now. Thank you for those points and for identifying some things that you can work towards when you're in the system. So I think we've heard about how we need to change the system, and when you're in the system, what can you do? And I think that some of the points you've raised are really important steps towards that, and the issue of meaningful participation, which also connects back to the leadership points that both Madhu and Naomi raised. So thank you again. And now we'll move, without further delay, we'll move to our next panelist, our last but not least panelist, Gita from Abad. So please go ahead. you're on.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this, like, really very inspiring, and I would say nowadays, a kind of fresh breeze for us working here in Lebanon with all the situation that we are trying to adapt to and to survive, I would say, with the revolution and the banking and financial crisis and COVID and the unfortunate Beirut blast and everything. I think nowadays talking about feminist approach and also fostering leadership and thinking through how we can better ensure advancing the gender equality agenda, I think it's crucial. And not only that, I think it's kind of a needed eye-opener to be able to move forward. Needless to say that humanitarian emergencies, natural disasters, and global pandemics put usually vulnerable groups, especially women and children, and specifically girls, at increased risk and exposure. And the current COVID-19 crisis, as my colleagues have mentioned, and its related global economic crisis is surely no exception. And gender equality, gender inequalities, and GBV being one of the most maybe widespread and persistent and devastating forms of human rights violation in our world today. And it's quite occurring in every country around the world and affects every home. Now, non-doubtfully, the best way to achieve peace everywhere is by simply reducing inequalities everywhere. And the best way to reduce specifically maybe gender-based violence and eliminating gender inequality is by involving everyone, and literally everyone, and engaging actively and effectively both sides of the equation of equality, women and men, and ensuring leaving no one behind. Gender inequalities is definitely holding us back, and it's time to come together around a kind of commitment to build an equal and violence-free future. Fostering the protection against women and girls and other vulnerable groups is not only the right thing to do, but also a smart investment to make, and it is possible. The evidence is inequalities and violence are still on the rise, and the question is, what we know is what we know, only the top of the iceberg. The evidence is as well, we know how to prevent it and we know how to address it. But the question is, are we all playing the right and full responsible role to step up political will and tangible actions? The evidence is preventing and reducing risks and violence, protection risk and violence, and investing in peace is a sound investment. But the question is, where are we investing and in what and how? In my modest opinion, and from civil society activism perspective, what has been done thus far is huge and reflective of quite massive coordinated effort on multiple levels. However, we can surely know much more and do even greater by, and here I would like to share like really few thoughts of based on what worked well and what did not work well and what we can do better. First and utmost, assessing our interventions fearlessly through the lens of the stakeholders and to ensure their engagement, voice, and prioritization of their concern. As my colleague mentioned earlier, she said, like really, women come with skills and capacities. And if we're not really asking them and hearing their voice and seeing the perspective from their side, when we are planning as humanitarian actors and as activists and feminist activists, I guess we are quite disregarding the priorities that they do consider as a top priority to change their own lives. Secondly, ensuring gender-sensitive, holistic, and intersectional interventions, especially between livelihood, peace and security, and protection agendas, to increase effectiveness and efficiency and sustainable impact. Prioritize meaningful participation of women and girls who are working on the front line of gender equality programming and GBV prevention and response programming, because their first-hand experience and expertise can help ensure a right-based approach and will be invaluable in both informing the conversation and shaping a forward-looking agenda that is responsive to the lived experiences of women and girls in humanitarian emergencies. Space should be created for girls and other groups particularly affected by gender-based violence and gender inequalities to directly voice their views and recommendations. Fourth is building strong mechanisms for follow-up and accountability. And this is really based on learning and maybe even learning through failing. While we engage local stakeholders, particularly women-led and women rights CSOs and girl-led groups and networks, in the identification, development, and evaluation of any follow-up and accountability processes, this is how we can really ensure that we're doing the right thing and we're ensuring justice to those that are not by necessity satisfied from our operation and our implementation. And this is how we also foster women and girls leadership in ensuring that they're the one holding us accountable for what we are working on for their own lives. 5, fostering safe and people-friendly communication of information mechanisms to ensure it is accessible to all. Right holders, especially kids, elderlies, and female elderlies, people with special needs, do not know about existence of services. And if they know, they have no means to connect. And if they have, they know their communication is quite traceable in multiple countries. And this was quite painful, especially during lockdown, where we discovered that we usually work a lot on outreach communication strategies in one direction, how we reach out at a time of where we are able to access everyone, while at the time of lockdown, it should be the other way around, where how we reach the unreachable. We never thought through our outreach mechanisms, especially to teen adolescent girls and to women committees, because it's usually done via community work, door to door. But at time of lockdown, this is where, for us at least as civil society, it was an eye-opener, like, are we really ensuring accessibility to all? We were not able to reach out to women with special needs at the time of lockdown. We were not able to reach out to children and girls that possibly they are being affected and they are being harassed by a family member and they're locked behind the same door. One example of this was like trying to use balconies to spread solidarity messages and hotlines in Lebanon during the time of COVID. 6, so I can also go through a few other ideas very quickly before the time is over. Using innovative and adapting our prevention and response activities, working with right holders themselves, couples, communities, workplaces, decision makers, and in a way inclusive to all. 7, ensure effective application of state due diligence principle in the practice and not in literature. And lastly, invest in people rather than numbers. And apologies for the boldness, but not acknowledging women aspirations, potentials, capacities, and priorities will not lead us to a brighter future where they lead on its building. What is needed today is acceleration of action, political will, and in smart, data-driven investment. It's ending gender inequalities is the right thing to do, a smart investment to make, and it's definitely possible by working with everyone and all together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sita, for those words. I feel like you've given us a little bit of a roadmap, and I was trying to write down everything and thought, well, maybe she's got it written down. I'm sure she could share it with us because I think you raised a number of really important points. And I also liked how you said, we have to engage everyone on both sides of the gender equality discussion. I think that That is really key. So thank you to the panelists. There's been so many different threads to pull, and at least for me. And now what we'd like to do is to hand over to you. We have a little bit less time than we were hoping, but I think we can do a good 30 minutes of discussion, feedback. So we would ask you to either raise your hands or write in the chat that you would like to speak or intervene. And to start with, we're just going to have our first intervention from Camila Hernandez, who is from Red Nacional de Mujeres in Colombia. Camila, can you speak?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this space. Okay, the context of the current COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted some of the consequences of the absence of feminist humanitarian action in many countries worldwide. I thought it could not be argued that the gaps between women and men are caused or maintained exclusively by that absence. It can be said that this lack in the way in which humanitarian actions have been conceived and implemented has facilitated in some way the permanence of scenarios of inequality between both genders. This can be explained by the fact that conceiving that there are specific cases in which aid should have gender focus and other in which gender could be understood as a neutral issue has lost sight of the fact that all crises or situations in which humanitarian aid is necessary affect women and men in different ways. In the Colombian case, that has been evidenced by the fact that, on the one hand, the national government was not prepared to face a social crisis of this magnitude, and the measures to close gender gaps proved to be insufficient in case of crisis, since women were one of the most affected social groups after the declaration of the health emergency. But on the other hand, there are the actions undertaken by women's organizations, human rights defenders, and international agencies responsible for providing humanitarian aid. While it's true that these organizations and agencies have played an important role in vigorously denouncing and implementing actions aimed at mitigating the effects of the pandemic on women's life, it should be emphasized that the fact that there was not clear route for humanitarian action to prevent the effects of the crisis in the women's collective shows that we need to think about these actions from a feminist perspective, which represents a challenge that we have must take if we want to close the gender gaps in humanitarian crisis. Okay, therefore we believe that this is important.
Sorry, just a minute, Camila. Sorry to interrupt you. Someone's not on mute. Can everyone please make sure they're on mute, because it's cutting. The sound is cutting in and out. Thank you. Go ahead, Camila.
Okay. For finish, we believe that it is important to bear in mind that humanitarian crises always have differentiated consequences on the lives of men and women, and this makes essential that all humanitarian actions be undertaken with this understanding. Thus, humanitarian interventions must be able to incorporate gender issues in their analysis in order to be truly effective and include the larger part of society. Thus, when proposing courses of action in this field, the impact of humanitarian crisis on women's life, how they can be prevented, and how to act in such contexts must always be considered. In essence, we think that pre-crisis action should be approached from a gender perspective to provide truly effective solutions in crisis contexts. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Camilla. I'm glad you raised that point about the pre-crisis action really at the end there, because I think that's something that we don't think about, talk about enough. I saw that, again, just a reminder, you can raise your hand or you can put a note in the chat if you'd like to speak. I saw that Delphine from CARE would like to speak. Please go ahead, Delphine.
Thank you, Julie, and good day, everybody. Thank you for organizing the session and to the speakers. It's also inspiring to hear. And when I hear all of you, I wonder why we are where we are today, why we haven't been able to make more progress, because the commitment and energy is certainly not lacking. No, I really liked the introduction from April as well, and how you actually framed the conversation, particularly by discussing whether or not we should perhaps frame addressing gender inequality and women and girls' rights more actually into a rights framework. And I believe that perhaps this is indeed something that we need to do. I think there is sometimes a tendency to consider gender equality, empowerment of women and girls as, you know, as we've heard a little bit, oh, it's something that is nice to do. Let's tick the box. But actually, it is a fundamental rights issue. And perhaps now more than ever, because of the impacts of COVID and how COVID is being used and instrumentalized to even actually reduce rights of women and girls even further, I think it's quite fundamental. And sometimes we are so driven by technical approaches, you know, thinking GBV technical, thinking SRH technical, participation in a technical way, that we forget perhaps to frame and maintain all of that into a human rights and a women's rights framework. And I think it's quite fundamental. So I'll stop here. Thank you. This is also a reminder to ourselves as CARE, you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Delphine. I don't see any hands. And I don't know if any of the participants, the panelists are interested in responding to Delphine's point. Madhu, not to put you on the spot, Madhu, but you did, I think, raise, oh, sorry, I see somebody has raised their hand now. So Madhu, I'll just hold off for 1 minute. I see that Anne Mitaru has her hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the conversation that's happening now. And I think what for me is, I think what makes this conversation a little bit different is that we are trying to bring into this conversation the feminist conversations that are happening alongside a larger humanitarian community. I think this is, we're a little late to this, but I'm really glad we are here now. So this is really encouraging. So well done to the organizers in sort of bringing this conversation to bear. One of the things that has come up, particularly, you know, listening to Madhu and to Naomi, is questions around using and leveraging on emergencies to shift power dynamics. And I think this is the crux of the matter. Power dynamics, particularly as shaped with women and men as not just survivors, but acts of change.
And I think, can you still hear her? I can't hear her anymore. No, and you.
Sorry.
Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
yeah,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I don't know where you lost me, but I'll just loop back a little bit. I just really wanted to say that I resonated with the comments that came from Madhu and Naomi around the importance of shifting power dynamics. But I think one of the things we always forget, particularly as humanitarians, is that emergencies provide an opportunity, very rare opportunity, to shift power dynamics. And maybe this, alongside, to framing what the other participants said, a rights-based approach, but also acknowledging power dynamics and leveraging those things to then shift the agency, the visibility, the contributions of women in the spaces we're working as humanitarians, whether as practitioners or whether as survivors of the humanitarian emergencies around us. Over.
Thank you, Anne, for those excellent points. And just to go back to Madhu and see if you want to respond this time, give you a bit of time.
Thank you. What I would really like to add to the observations made is that I mentioned when I was speaking that there is also a need for a safe space. If you really want women to participate, an environment that is encouraging so that women can really participate and can come forward. And there is also this question of course, funding. Why is it we do not have organizations? Means why is there so few women-led organizations in humanitarian response? It is, of course, the analysis of country officers have shown that less than, I think, 7% of funding goes to them, so which is definitely problematic. I'm not sure of the exact figure, but I do know that it is very, very poor. And within these organizations, even organizations which are led by men, my experience in Syria has shown that a number of the NGOs do not have policies which support women's participation within their organizations. They do not have even the basic separate toilet for women within the organizations. They do not have a proper maternity policies. They do not have, and women are not encouraged to also participate in trainings. It's assumed that because they have children, so skill enhancement or promotion of leadership is also absent within the organizations. So if we really want them to participate, we need to provide that space. I have always been wondering, this is just a thought, I've been always wondering that if for political participation, we said that the reservations will work, we start 30% or with 50% or things like that. Do we start with reservations in committees that we are establishing within the different camps and say that is a beginning to promote women's leaderships? I don't know whether it will work. But if we do that and we allocate resources for that, maybe it could be a start, because it worked in India for panchayats. We do have a large number of women who are, we started with 30%. Now in many states, we have more than 50% women as leaders. So it could be, it will work even in humanitarian situations. Don't know. Just a thought.
Thank you, Madhu, for those points. And just this reminds me, again, I'm just posting it in the link here, but the report from WRC that was recently released looking at really the humanitarian from the inside. So linking back to the work that organizations need to do themselves internally. I still don't see any other questions, so I'm gonna go to Naomi and see if, I think you're still online, Naomi, if you have any thoughts that you would like to add as well to this conversation, particularly around WROs or the work of the Feminist Network. Are you still on?
Yeah, I'm still on.
Great.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you everybody for the contribution. This has been a very informative section. I'm here listening and thinking that I'm in the right space. Yeah, when we talk about women leadership, we that work at the grassroots level, we are at another level. So imagine women that at the national level, at the global level, we are still fighting for spaces to be recognized. That systemic effect is trickled down to the local level. I'm going to give you an example. During the COVID, before the COVID, it was Ebola. a lot of women-led organizations were on the front line, including my organization. We work tirelessly. We work with our personal resources. One may think that all of the money that was being raised to come to Nigeria at the peak of COVID, that all of the CSOs, including women-led organizations who have had access to funding to actually do the work they wanted to do. No. Women-led organizations are not structured in the way the INGOs and the donors expect us to be. Because when it's a natural inclination for us to respond whenever there is the putting all of the local organizations, especially the women-led organizations, to respond in a structured form before they can have access to funding to do the work. And that is problematic because at the end of the day, all of the community is going to be NGOized. That means the women that are used to doing the work before funding, even when funding comes, they are feeling left behind, and it trickles down to making them being pulled. So until the donor community and who can see that, the women-led, women in leadership can actually see that, they understand the issue of women's rights. So while we are pushing for more women into the decision-making table, humanitarian system, is to ensure that the women-led and the women's rights organization have access to funding to actually do their work. Because more women continue to be poor because they are taking the natural, the minimal resources to respond when disaster hits. And whenever there is access to funding, they are left behind because they are not structured to getting funding. And if we start to push all of the women groups to being structured, we will lose grassroots movement. We're going to lose CBO's movement. And that is happening actually into most of the community that we are in. So it's about time while we are pushing for women into leadership, it's about time that we push for having women's rights and women-led organizations having access to funding to actually do the work that they are doing at the community level. Because they are not just responding because they want to respond. They are the first responder. They are the ones on the front line. So, and the men that are within the top decision-making, they are naive in a sort of way. They don't understand women's issue. So it is natural within the context. So you see that more women continue to suffer from disaster, more women continue to suffer when there is crisis, because the people who are making the decision and framing the humanitarian response do not have that that feminist lens that don't leave no one behind. And I like the way someone said that women issue is not homogeneous. No, there are trans women. There are women who have, there are older women. There are women who have different issues. If you are putting and screening women into one box to say all of the women they give birth, all of the women have period, then that is problematic. We have to put women into different categories according to the needs specific and respond when disaster hits. And we have to ensure that because when they lead it with the feminist lens, that's why I push for the feminist humanitarian network. It can sustain the feminist humanitarian network is a system that leaves no one behind. That understanding that people are made different bodies, but the issues are different. And that feminist humanitarian system is saying that people who are at the grassroots level should be the ones to lead the response, because they are the ones that are there with disaster, before disaster, they are there doing disaster, and they need to build the community back. So if you have that feminine analysis into all of our response, we won't be having a conversation. Maybe we'll be having this conversation how to make our response work better, and we'll be asking for leadership role. So thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. And we've touched here and there about funding and donors throughout this conversation. And let's not forget, money is power. But if we look at it, then that means that women and girls have very little power, and WROs and WLOs even less. I see that Aimee Chalan has her hand up, and then April. Aimee, go ahead.
Hello, yeah, I'm Chief Executive of Medical Aid for Palestinians, and I just want to thank all the panelists for their great interventions. It's been a really interesting discussion. I was very interested in particular, I think Wan discussed the difficulty of monitoring and evaluating meaningful participation, and just sort of spoke a bit about the differences between or the problems of just measuring via percentages and numbers. And I just wondered if the panelists sort of had some ideas around other ways of monitoring and evaluating meaningful participation and some of the things that we should be looking at in as alternatives.
Thank you for your question. April, do you want to see if the panelists want to answer that before you go, or do you want to go ahead? The panelists? Do any of the panelists have ideas?
I think I think what we are trying to do in some of the locations is that not just look at quantitative KI kind of interviews and collection of information, but also looking at more participatory audits, or what should we say, I would look at CARE's rapid gender analysis. That is something that we are promoting, to really look at how we could see whether participation has worked and whether it has impacted and improved access. So those are some of the interventions that we are trying in the location that we are posted in.
Thank you, Madhu. Wan or Gita? I mean, Naomi? Does anyone want to intervene? If not, I'll go to April. Maybe just quickly.
Yeah.
Oh, Gita, go ahead.
Yeah. So actually, one of the ideas was also is to involve, and what we tried, especially at the level of some of the protection structures for high-risk cases, like the emergency safe shelters that we're operating in Lebanon, was actually designing the entire complaint mechanism, including the feedback mechanism and feedback forms. Actually, it was designed by the right holders, beneficiaries of the shelter. We did it throughout a process of 1 year, where we asked like a kind of like from 360-degree used methodology on how they would like to share, like, you know, their opinion or their feedback, even around the tools. We never thought through, for instance, out of the box, you know, it can be other than a complaint box or like a form. You have women that cannot read, or simply when you have a visit, but also, for instance, they said using some of the safe chat box, like on our Instagram page or our Facebook page, where they felt they can actually reach out beyond the team of the shelter. 1, 2, it was also using some of the art techniques in expression of satisfaction or ideas, like using some of the mandalas and with like color coded. And this is how they said, like, we can actually communicate if there is something going not very well. This is like very specific to the shelter program, but we thought rather than for us using the usual CRM framework, it can be by ideas where they feel like this is the safe way where I can express my opinion or my recommendation, or also there is something going not very well in the way we are providing the service, or there's a kind of allegation or else. So our learning was ensuring that women are part of the thinking from moment zero. Everything starts by them and should be ending and end at their level. Even in our campaigning, this is the way to go that we did for advocacy. They for let's say repeating the Article 522 about marrying your rapist. Even the campaign video, the character, the design, the slogan, it was expressions that they say during counseling session when they communicate about sexual violence or rape. So they said, we feel like the white dress doesn't cover and wash out the shame, and doesn't wash out the rape that happened. So we took it as a slogan, as is, as simple as that. When we use a feminist approach in the practice, not only in what we are calling upon, we apply it. Honestly, our life is easier as in designing, because they know better than us what they want and how they want to make it happen. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And that reminds me, there's Oxfam has done some work and is doing some work on feminist meal, feminist monitoring and evaluation. There are some tools and some examples from where this has been applied in development, but also some humanitarian contexts as well. So there might be the including them from the start part is one of the key points around feminist meals. So there might be some information online there as well. April, over to you, and then I think over to Anu to close.
I just wanted to, to link a lot of these feminist conversations back to some of the points around the need to really interrogate institutional arrangements, or to really interrogate, the structures that we work in. I think one of the things that, we started the conversation on was around how working on women's rights is about challenging the patriarchy. It's about challenging power and privilege. And so, of course, when you challenge power and privilege, you get a lot of resistance. This is to Delphine's question around, how there's so many of us feminists, but the system hasn't really changed. It's because we're not in positions of decision making. It's because just because you have women in positions of leadership does not mean that there is a feminist perspective. It does not mean that those women are working for women's rights. And I think it's so important to really remember that, we're talking about debunking power and privilege, and that requires all of us. I've had lots of conversations with people who, men in particular, who feel that they are losing privilege, and that can feel like oppression to them. And so I think, when we work on gender equality, it's so important to really think about and to analyze power and privilege, and to remind people in power that they do have power and privilege, and that needs to be shared. And I think that, until we have more feminists in positions of decision making, we will still be having these conversations at this level. So I just want to give a plug to, it's not only enough to have women in decision making, but it's about women pushing women's rights. It's about women pushing that need to challenge power and patriarchy.
Thank you, April. And I think that's a great segue over to Anu, who's going to provide us with some reflections from panelists. So Anu Pillay is the Global Women's Protection Advisor for ActionAid International. I'm sure many of you on this call already know Anu, but please, Anu, go ahead.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, April. Yes, I want to pick up from what April just said, because it is a good lead into all that has been said today, and what we talked about in the last talk that we had on the similar topic, in that it's not enough, it's not enough to just put women into positions, and it's not enough to have gender advisors. I think that we really are very, very clear from everything that everybody has said, is that what we are looking for is a feminist approach, a feminist leadership. I think that's what many of the panelists have said was missing. But just to recap what the topic that we were talking about was disrupting power and the culture. And I think Madhu and Naomi talked a lot about the culture that we need to disrupt, as well as the power. The culture of the humanitarian system, which Madhu called in a very direct way, is that the humanitarians are lazy. And I think if you think about that, what that means is, and what she said, lazy to make the effort to actually, so somebody said, I think it was Delphine who said, why are we here today? Where there's so much energy and so much commitment to feminist approaches and feminist thinking, why are we gathered here today to have this talk? Because there is that laziness in the culture of not wanting to make the effort to make the change. That crisis gives us the opportunity to see where the changes can be made, and yet we don't take it. I think Naomi talked a lot about going beyond the boxes that women are put into on sexual reproductive rights, on protection and childcare. It's far beyond that. We've gone, this is where we get focused on, and yet what we're really wanting is women in influential leadership again. But as we said, not just any women, feminists. We need feminists in influential leadership. And I think Wan talked a lot about how that can be done when you're not too lazy to make the effort. You can go beyond box ticking, beyond tokenism. And I think the really great point that came out of that was that we terrorized by time. We get told there's no time, and we know that change takes time. We know that to bring about these changes, we need to have the time to see it work. We need to have the time to bring the women in, to gain their trust, to have meaningful participation, and to actually measure whether this is working or not. And I think what Madhu was saying about, is it reservation? Is it a quota system? We don't know what will work, but we should at least try something. But we're not even willing to do that. And we're seeing that, the sad thing is that Voice Amplified, an organization that I also work with, as well as the Feminist Humanitarian Network, where I am a steering committee member, have done research with the COVID-19 pandemic to see what were women doing, what were their roles, how were they. And we heard from Naomi, we heard from Madhumita, we heard from Wan that women are at the front line, they are the responders. We're seeing it in the COVID-19. And this has been said. So the research that the Feminist Humanitarian Network did and Voice Amplified have done has shown that nothing new came out. And this is the sad fact. You're talking about crisis as an opportunity for change. It's not new. We know this. Feminists have known this. Feminists have debunked all these ideas of the humanitarian principles being the, militarist, neutrality being a militarist principle. All of these things have been talked about, have been debunked 20 years ago. I was in Beijing. How many years ago was that? It just shows you now how old I am. But the point is that we've been saying this over and over and over. What more do we need to do? We need to be, as Gita said, we need to be fearless. We need to be bold. We need to come up with innovative ways to make the changes. And I think she gave us some examples and some ideas of how we can go forward, and we really need to capture those. But I think that what Naomi said, which really struck me, is women get left out because they're told that they're not structured. They get told that they don't comply with the rules. They can't show, they don't have finance departments. I actually heard a finance person in an INGO say, we can't fund this organization because they don't have a finance department. So I think what Naomi said, which is so really important for us to take away, is if we do that, we're bureaucratizing an activist movement. We're bureaucratizing the grassroots women who come out in their thousands and respond. They use their own money, which they shouldn't be. And what happens is the humanitarian actors say, well, they don't need money. They've been doing it anyway, so let them continue. And this is how the women remain poor. So it doesn't go hand in hand that if you are a responder and you're an activist and you're not an NGO, that you have to be poor, that you can't be funded, that you can't be given the resources, access to the resources to make the work happen. So I think these were very, very important and powerful points that have come out of the discussion today. And I really, really want to say we don't need more evidence. We don't need to be saying people do more research. Research has been done, and we've been saying the same thing over and over. We've been saying, that all these things are happening. We've been begging, we've been pleading. Somebody said to me the other day, we need to, ask for a truce. Let's ask for a truce. Let's say for one day in the whole world, let there be no violence against women. Let's for one day, let's see what will happen. I said, you know what? Sad to say we did that. 20, 30 years ago, we had the whole Take Back the Night program. Does anybody remember it? We said, stop. We need to go out into the night and we're going to take back the night. We want to walk fearlessly down the road and not be scared for our lives. Where are we today, 20, 30 years later? We're saying the same thing. So it's time for us to really step forward. April, you wrote in the chat, why are feminists shy? We got to stop being shy. We're not shy anymore. We're going to come out in our numbers and we are going to take what is rightfully ours, which is to take up that leadership space and change, disrupt the power and change the culture. That's what we have to do. The elite culture, the boys club that Naomi referred to, we've got to change it. We've got to stop it. And that's what I'll end with the end. Hand it back to you, Julie.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for wrapping this up and for really challenging us to push ourselves and to push internally as well within our organizations to be bold. What was it that you read? Not lazy. And, you know, I think that this has been a really great discussion, a really, really great panel. And I am thrilled that we have had such great numbers. And there's a lot of nice hashtags there if anybody wants to pick up on. Hashtag not too lazy, I think was my favorite. Anyways, thank you again to everyone for participating. This is not the end of the conversation. Let's be clear. We will continue as the gender reference group to host in different settings with different organizations, some of these discussions, because we have to keep pushing. We have to keep challenging ourselves and really bringing into the discussions, as someone said, the feminist agenda, the feminist approach, feminist principles. So thank you again, and to our esteemed panelists for this really great start to my day and weekend. Have a very nice rest of your day. Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
April and Julie. Thank you.
Bye-bye.